the Embody Festival, reclaiming our erotic feminine bodies. Hello and welcome to Reclaiming Our Erotic Feminine Bodies. I'm Nadia, your host for this online festival where we are really exploring and unpacking what it is that is truly stopping us from feeling connected to our sensuality and our erotic essence. And today we're going to sort of flip the script a little. And I have here with me my partner in crime, partner in life, Jacob Sokol, who is also a life coach and runs a company called Sensifi. And he's going to be interviewing me so that you guys get to hear a little bit about my story and my journey and how I came to do the work that I do today and why it is that I'm even running this festival. So, hi, Jacob.
Hello, baby. And hello to all of my babies.
Welcome. So one thing I need to tell you guys is we live together, but he's actually calling in from Russia. Are you still in St. Petersburg?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So St. Petersburg, Russia. And I'm in New York. So it's really fun for us to be doing this. It's actually the first time we're talking since he left. So it'll be, I'm glad to get this QT with him this hour.
Well, thank you for having me here.
Awesome. So I'm going to let you take it away. I'm going to switch and be in the interviewee role now.
Well, let me start by saying how much I love you and see if I can get you to blush a little bit on camera.
Oh, I have a lot of blush on. So even if I blushed, I don't know if it would show underneath the fake blush. But thank you, babe. I love you too.
You're welcome. And I think it would be a really cool place for everyone who's joining us today if you could rewind time and take us back. Let us know kind of what got you into this embodiment journey that you are now on.
Well, that's a great question that you asked, Jacob Sokol. So,
thank you.
So the way that I really got into the work that I do now, which is embodiment, sensuality, and health coaching, is because I didn't have a good relationship with my body. I was super disconnected from my body, and that's for quite a few reasons. So I'm going to tell you guys sort of two different stories that were happening in parallel in my life. One was in relation, should I say, to my body when it came to dancing and movement, and then the other piece was my health, which was not doing very well. So when I was about 16 or so, I was diagnosed with 2 ulcers. I used to wake up with insane stomach aches. Like I'd wake up way before school and I would essentially like be holding my stomach and like walk over to the kitchen and make myself a cup of mint tea and like drink it and then get back into bed and lay on my stomach. And I just had this like really elaborate ritual of, did you know this? Have you heard me say this before? I don't even know.
Am I a bad boyfriend if the answer is no?
No, it's fine. Because I feel like I say this all the time when I talk to people at work, but you and I don't necessarily talk about this. So it's cool. You're learning some stuff about me too. So yeah, basically I used to wake up, have this like really long, elaborate ritual before going to school, all in order to stop the like intense stomach ache that I would have so that I could be functional throughout the day. And so you can imagine if at the age of 16, that was my default, I always had this response of trying to, like, my body was working against me. Oh gosh, I have another stomach ache. How am I gonna, do well on this test? Or how am I gonna function at this thing? Or And so what happened is very early on, I started to feel like my body was my enemy instead of my ally. And over the years, this just got worse. I started having issues. On birth control pills for a little while. And then as a result, I started getting like really embarrassing and like super shameful stuff in my body, like recurrent yeast infections and things. I'm like realizing I'm really embarrassed to talk to you about that, but I have no problem telling the world. So all these things were happening, and it got to the point where I was like, enough is enough. Like the doctors weren't helping. They just kept prescribing medication after medication. And so what I started to do is research it on my own. And I remember this guy, Dan, who was like Dan at Hotmail or something. I mean, this was back in a long time ago, early 2000s. Just this random guy whose website I found, who started helping me over email doing the Candida elimination diet. And so I started doing that. I ended up finding a naturopath. And that was really the beginning of me starting to really geek out on, you know, holistic health and nutrition. And I got really, I just fell in love with learning about all this stuff on my own. And I started to realize that this whole time I had been working against my body, thinking my body was working against me. And I had this like agenda that I was putting on my body. And through going through this process of finally really handling all the stuff myself, I started to feel empowered. And I realized my body actually has, you know, the perfect formula and knows exactly what to do if I just give her the right tools and the right amount of support, as well as the trust. So that was sort of like my health, like part of the journey.
How old were you at this point?
Great question. When I started to heal myself, or
Yeah. When you're like, my body is the shiznit. She knows everything that needs to be known.
Okay, I think that wasn't like an overnight thing. It definitely started off with me just being interested in the idea that my body can heal herself around, I don't know, 23, 24. And then over the years, I feel like every year there was like a new symptom or a new thing that would come up that I'm like, ooh, maybe I can heal this thing on my own. And, you know, I started discovering I had food intolerances. I started to address those, all these other little tiny pesky things that were in my body, like used to have this like red stuff that would just appear. It was just like red around here. Don't laugh. So it would just have this like, yeah, tell me.
Well, I feel like it's important to tell everyone else who's watching right now that we have something called quadrant 4.
Oh yeah.
Quadrant 4 is...
Tell people about it, yeah.
Quadrant 4 is the quadrant that we put things into that we would define as too much information in our relationship with each other. So the red stuff, the yeast infections, might fall into quadrant 4, not because we don't love all aspects of each other, although maybe that's a little bit of a stretch, but because it's just not helpful for sexual chemistry.
Yeah, which is really good, because I think we should talk, you know, at some point we'll talk about that as well. It is good to have a quadrant 4. You don't want to just become like best friends who live together and know everything about each other. So unfortunately, babe, this is part of my journey, but this is the end of the health piece. So we're not going to elaborate more on that. For all the women listening, if you talk to me one-on-one, we can get into more details about all the quadrant 4 stuff, which is essentially like where I spend about half of my time with my clients anyways, but not with Jacob. So we'll leave it there. And then the other piece of my journey was around dancing. So when I was 2 years old, I decided I was going to be a ballerina at 2. And I started taking ballet classes. And I was living in Lebanon, but then I eventually moved to the States for a couple of years. And I was actually training at a really notorious ballet company, the Maryland Youth Ballet. And I was about 9, and I was just so excited. Like I'm going on point. I'm going to have my pink tutu. And essentially what happened was a teacher sat me down with my mom and was like, so your daughter has some fucked up knees and they're shaped in a way that she cannot go on point. She cannot become a professional ballerina. And I remember that day was really heartbreaking for me. And I was like, I'm never going to dance again. And what happened was that was the first time that I felt, even before the health stuff really started, that my body was an obstacle to my dreams, because I so badly wanted to be a ballerina. And it was just like, it was, you know, you're 8 or 9 years old and basically an adult goes, sorry, it's not going to happen. And so for many years, I disconnected with that part of myself, with that connection to my body as well. Add on the health stuff that I talked about earlier. And you can imagine by my early 20s, you know, I'm running around in a very masculine world. I'm a film producer. I'm like, go, managing people, you know, working 18-hour days. that relationship with my body was one that always felt like an inconvenience as opposed to something that was a superpower. And so it wasn't until my body fully broke down, and I think there was a nudge in my intuition saying like, this is not the way for you. Like, you're just gonna collapse and die at like 35 if you keep going this way. So that's sort of how I got to where I am now. And in reconnecting with my relationship through health coaching and healing my own, gut and insides, it became easier for me to connect to the emotional body, and to connect to the dancer in me again. So I finally ended up finding a different way of moving and connecting through yoga and sensual movement that isn't, in a pink tutu, although I can totally wear one if I want to. But it was a beautiful full circle that I got to experience going through all of that.
I think you're the first woman who I've met who like introduced me to loving a tutu as much as you love a tutu, like a grown-ass woman who's like you like pray to the tutu like it's a holy object.
Yeah, I do. I like the tutus.
Yeah. So, and I love that you love the tutu. So it works on both ends. This event is reclaiming our erotic feminine. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know that that's a large part of the work that you do is to help women reconnect with their feminine, with their erotic, with their sensuality, with their sexuality. Was there a time in your life where you can remember really feeling like disconnected from that, or like that wasn't okay? Or what brought you to the point where like this is something that it's not just about eating or dancing, but it seems like there's another layer here that's really important to you?
Yeah. That's a great point. So it's amazing how, like, even as you just hear my story, I'm sure this is the story of so many women out there. We have all these different, like, on that one journey, we've got these little sections of our journey that are like different layers that continue to disconnect us from what is the true experience of being in our own bodies. So there's the movement piece, there was the health piece, and then of course there is the erotic and sensual or sexual piece. Which all women in some shape or form, and unfortunately more and more in the last month, we've been hearing what's been going on, because a lot of women have been speaking up, and we're realizing it's even more than we thought it was. But basically every woman gets some sort of messaging, whether it be through media, right? Like, I remember I was in Lebanon during the war, and I would pick up Teen magazine, it was like everywhere. Pick up Teen magazine, you read about, you see all the advertisements, you read about all the stuff you're supposed to do to be like a sexy teenager. And you see all these photoshopped women. So you've got that messaging. You have religion, right? So most of us, not everyone, but most of us have grow up in some sort of culture that has predominantly one religion that is saying something, whatever religion you look at out there, there's always something very, very strongly opinionated stuff about, how women should be and act, and what the relationship to their bodies are. Of course, actual experiences. So things that happen to women. So, and that could be from the tiniest little, piece of like messaging. So it could be, you're 7 or 8 years old. Like, I'll give you an example in my life. I was, I don't remember my age. I don't know, maybe like 10, 11, something like that. Like really like prepubescent. And I was like just starting to blossom into like a very young teen girl. And I used to love putting on shows in my home, because I feel like most girls do. And it was Christmas, and I found this one song that was like a sort of like sexy Christmas tune. I don't remember who it was or what, but it was like, Santa baby, that one. I don't know I'm not going to karaoke now. It's really going to be painful for everyone. But I didn't realize at the time that that was not something, you know, that was sort of like a sexy song. And so I do this, I prepare the whole show. I'm very excited about it. I have my sisters as backup dancers. The whole thing's happening. And my dad had his friend over, and I put on my whole like red outfit, red and green, and my little like mini skirt and da-da-da. And I do this like little dance. And afterwards, I remember my dad taking me aside and being like, that was incredibly embarrassing for me. That was inappropriate. And you need to not do that again. And I remember feeling so bad because like, I didn't know. And I just wanted to like entertain people and like impress my dad's friend. And like, I didn't realize that that was like, that I was like exuding sensual because I was in that like prepubescent place. So I feel like there's so many incidents like that that happen to women, you know, young girls. So if it's, you know, them being told to like close their legs at a certain point or put on your top because now you're 5 years old or 6 and you're not supposed to show, you know, I have little sisters, they're about 6 and 7. And now it's interesting when I get to spend time with them, I get to see them now, like they have their cousin who's a boy who they're best friends with. And, you know, they're always running around the house and whatnot. And like, now they're like, oh no, you need to close your eyes. Like, and they turn around and they like put on their, like, they switch their top. And that wasn't something you would have seen at like 3 or 4. So I think there's stuff like that. And then of course that spectrum goes all the way through, you know, different little incidences of assault on the street, molestation, all the way to, you know, full on rape, unfortunately, for some women. And so no matter how small, or it's not small, you know, I think this is a part of the problem is like for a lot of us, we feel like, oh, well, this incident wasn't a big deal versus like if I get raped, it is. So no matter where you are on the spectrum, it has a huge effect on your relationship to your body and feeling safe in your sensuality. And there's something that just, there's messaging in your body that just gets plastered on. You start to just feel like, oh, this is not appropriate in this place. Or you start to compartmentalize when it is okay for you to, you know, show up in this place, you know, versus showing up like, okay, I'm in a meeting, right? So that was like one of the more, I guess, I don't want to say innocent like instances that happened, but one of the ones that felt less of a violation, but were very much still a clear piece of messaging that sticks. I mean, the fact that I remember this, I mean, I must have done like hundreds of shows when I was a kid, but I remember that one distinctly because of all the shame that I felt afterwards, that I had embarrassed my dad in front of his friend. And of course, there's lots more, which I can elaborate on now or later. Up to you.
Well, I want to give you a big hug right now. And yeah, I know, I can just imagine how upsetting that event was for you, in part because how much you love your dad. And to do something like that where you were going to let him down, but you were just being your natural self, that was just going to have fun. So knowing you and your dad, and yeah, I see it. So, yeah, we can go further in if you'd like, if there's anything else that you think would be empowering for other women to hear. That I know you've had a rich life of different experiences, and yeah, really have cultivated you into this amazing soul that you are, and this amazing being, helping so many women in such a deep and profound way. And you know, I know that didn't just come from nowhere.
Yeah.
So if you're inspired to go deeper into it, we can, or we can go somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, let's do it. So I, you know, myself, I've had, other than, you know, counting like all the like catcalling and inappropriate behavior that may happen like throughout your life, by men, like in clubs or on the street or wherever, I'd say I have three different incidences that really, or incidents that really stick out, that stick out in my mind. And they're all slightly, I guess, different in the level of offense. But they all seem to be stuck in my memory. So I feel like there's something there about that. And in all of them, you know, I grew up going to therapy a lot. I was always like really into seeing counselors and therapists. And I always was like, oh, I've told people about all this stuff. Like, it's all good. It's handled. I know how I feel about it. I'm not like hiding it. And so, and it wasn't like a situation where I was like raped. So I felt like, oh, it's okay. Like, I'm fine. Like, it's just, you know, most women have this happen to them. And I would have friends who got raped. So I'd be like, oh, they're, you know, we got to focus on them and not on like my experience. And the reason I bring this up is because I think a lot of women, I see this in a lot of my clients, is there is this, oh, well, there's that thing that happened, but you know, it wasn't a big deal because I wasn't raped. And what I'm learning now is that there is, notice how I'm like, let me do everything except talk about the incidents. Um, it's so hard. It's so hard. I'm sure everyone listening gets it. But, you know, now in me starting to do some like trauma resolution work, which is a very new thing in my body, I'm realizing how even the tiniest little things can have such a huge effect on your nervous system and can loop you into like a trauma pattern for a really, really long time. So everyone who's listening, no matter how small you think it is, if there was a boundary that was crossed, it was crossed. And so one of the incidents, you know, was, I like can't even talk about it. I'm like, was my mom watching? Okay. So one of the incidents was my grandfather. My grandfather was living with us my whole life. So he was sort of like my second dad. And the violation itself, which I'm like not comfortable describing, but it definitely crossed a boundary, but it wasn't a huge one and it wasn't recurrent because I spoke up about it instantly. But it was the one that most affected me emotionally, because it was someone who was like my dad and who raised me and who basically held me from when I was like, a baby, couldn't even walk, who taught me how to walk, who just watched me through all my iterations, all the way into my like early teens. And this happened when I was about 13-ish. And it was huge. It was huge because it, of course, caused a lot of distrust. Like now I feel like it's very hard for me to trust people I'm closest to. But it also caused so much mayhem in my family. So I spoke up about it instantly. It caused, I was very lucky that I had parents who were generally Westernized and who were like, this is unacceptable. And didn't really talk about it. So I didn't get a chance to really emotionally process anything with my family because that part was still hush hush and I would have liked it to be differently, but I can understand being a parent. It must be like really scary, but they handled it logistically, meaning they had my grandfather leave. And that was hard because like our home like broke up in a way, right? Like we were all together and after 13 years because of my sexuality, my grandfather had to go away and he died soon after. And I felt a lot of like feelings about that too, because I felt like, oh, was I part of that? Did he die from grief? Like of not being alone? Because like in our culture, we'd never have someone stay alone. And he eventually was staying in an apartment close by, but alone. And that was really tough on me because I felt like, oh, like it's like my fault that he's alone, So there was that incident. And then the other one that I feel like is worth mentioning is that I, around the same time, maybe like a few months later, it was a not fun year. I had to go into surgery. And when I went into surgery and came out, I was still in that place. Like, I don't know, have you ever been under like full anesthesia?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I have.
Oh, for the appendicitis?
Yeah. You don't lose any girlfriend points for not knowing that.
No, but yeah, okay. Well, I guess it makes sense. Appendicitis is a big one, right? I don't know. I've never had my appendix removed, but
yeah.
So the feeling, right? Like, it's like you're super, like, it's intense. You come out and you're like, I have no fucking clue where I am or what's going on for like the first period of time.
Yeah.
So right when they took me into my own room after I was in the like recovery place, I was still like very woozy. And my whole family, everyone who was there left. So one person went to get something, the other one went to get a friend. I don't know what happened, but suddenly I was empty. There's no one in the room. And this male nurse walks in and he's like, oh, I'm just checking your like little IV drip thing. And then he's like, let me just check like that you don't have these like stickers that they put on you like before you go into an operation. And so he was, you know, checking. And I remember being like, even though I was like really out of it, going like, I'm pretty sure someone took off those stickers when I first came out, but okay, whatever. Maybe there's still some on. So he's checking. Of course, he's not checking. And I could instantly, you know, even in the drugged up state I was in, I could feel like my instincts being like, something's wrong. Something's wrong. And it was very confirmed that something was wrong when I felt him inside me and like his hands. And afterwards, and so I was like freaking out, but I was completely frozen. And I remember feeling really guilty about freezing, but also being like, but I'm drugged up. Like I literally can't even move. Like you can barely move coming out of anesthesia. But on top of that, even if I wasn't, like now that I understand trauma a lot more, and I understand that freeze is one of the responses that a lot of animals have to something that is potentially dangerous. I'm realizing, oh yeah, like this happens to a lot of us. And it's actually a protective mechanism our body does. It's not because we're stupid and because we're weak. And that's really important for people to know that happened. But the drugs didn't help either. I was like, you know. And then he basically walked around and took my hand and was still pretending he was like checking pulse, or I don't even know what he was doing. And then he put his hand on his crotch, and it was very prominent. And so I knew, I was like, I'm not dreaming. Like this is happening right now, you know? And I think this is the other thing that happens to a lot of women is like, even as something is happening, we're like, this is not happening. This is not happening. There's such a strong sense of like, it's not happening. And so lots of times your brain actually stays there and thinks it never happened. Like I still have moments where I doubt that this really happened. I'm like, oh, what if I was just like dreaming? And anyways, so I go into that detail, which is really difficult for me because, yeah, I keep thinking about who's listening. And I'm going into these details because I think that it's really important to understand that the response that we have in the moment is really one of protection. Our nervous system is doing what it can to help us to minimize like the damage. And that whole thing was really scary because like the second he left, like, you know, I ended up again telling my mother, and it was, you know, a manager who came and asked me all these questions, and I look at my arm and there's like blood coming out of my arm. So like something had happened. It could have been coincidence. I don't think so. But basically something happened where he like messed with, like, I'm like, is he even a nurse? Like, we don't know who this guy was. Like maybe he just came in looking like a nurse. Like I have no idea. Because they couldn't find anyone and no one ever spoke about it the next day, because that seems to be a pattern in our culture. And that was it. But you can imagine it's like pretty scary when you are in a position of helplessness to then also be taken advantage of. So I think that was another one that had a huge effect on me, because whenever I am in a state of like not really fully in control, like I feel, oh, this is when I can be taken advantage of, right? So you can imagine why, and you having met me at like the peak of my neurosis, or at least, you know, towards the end of it, you know, and you still see like the moments where I go back into that like neurotic place of wanting to control everything, that, you know, maybe part of it is that, like, it comes from incidents like that, where there is this like, oh, I have to be totally on top of everything. And I'm always in this like fight or flight place of like, you know, defensiveness. Like, what if something comes flying at me or whatnot? So those are the ones I want to share. I know we spent a lot of time on this, but I think it's important for the women who are listening.
Well, I want to acknowledge and honor and celebrate the shit out of you for feeling those nerves of dancing around, speaking about this publicly for so long, and jumping in. And really, you know, that's why you are a revolutionary. That's why you are someone who I have the utmost respect and admiration for, and why so many women feel so connected and held by you. Is because of your willingness to go in deep and feel it.
Thank you.
You're feeling it right now.
Right.
You're feeling it right now.
I am. I've been feeling many feelings all week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, you know, how have you been able to move past these experiences, and do you ever really fully move past them, or is it still something that you are conscious of and aware of in your life?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a ton of things that helped with all of this stuff. So number one is just my general journey in reconnecting with my body. I think is really, really important. But it was really finding a safe space, which in my version, in my journey, was finding an S Factor studio. So if you guys haven't been, if you're just tuning in for the first time and you haven't listened to any of the other interviews, because I pretty much talk about S Factor in every single interview, I think. S Factor is a sensual movement studio that is just, it's all women, and it's really it's the way that they created it is it feels like a cocoon and like a womb space for women to go into, that has no mirrors, that feels really nice and like warm and cozy. And the whole class is about connecting to how you feel and your senses. And so when I started doing that many, many years ago, I finally understood that, okay, here where there are no men, I can connect to this part of myself again, and I can explore and see what's true for me today in my body. And I think it's important for every woman to have a container, whether it's something like S Factor or another type of dance class, or just a group of women that they meet with, but somewhere where they can really connect to that part of themselves that maybe needs to be shut off, or they feel needs to be a little bit more shut off when they're interacting, you know, in the world. Like in New York, we get lots of women who are in, you know, like finance and the corporate world, where they have to really show up in very much in their masculine energy. And so this gives them a space. S Factor is notorious for having these types of women there, because it's a space for them to explore that part of themselves a lot more. And then it eventually spills out into your life. So I can speak, you know, in my journey with sensual movement, I started off really angry and so much rage, and that still pops up sometimes. And then I think being over time, I started to soften into my joy, into my surrender through movement. And that's around the time when I started to meet you. And then I think you and our relationship, and me feeling really safe in our relationship and feeling so held and so loved, then came back and started to show in my body and in my movement. So now I'm going through a phase where I'm exploring a lot of joy in my sensual feminine movement, as opposed to the anger and the rage. And
so let me ask about this from an outside perspective. So when you say your sensual movement journey, what does that mean for someone who's never taken an S Factor class? You said you started off experiencing anger and rage. Like, what do you mean? You walked into the studio and started to hit people, or like, how does that work?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. Basically, it just means that when you start to tap in, it's sort of like meditating, right? So When you sit down to meditate and you haven't ever, initially you may notice that the same, maybe sadness just keeps coming up every single time you sit down to meditate, And then maybe a year later, you start to feel like, oh, now I feel ease or joy, or now I feel anger underneath the sadness. So it's not actually sadness, it's anger. So in sensual movement, we are also just going inward. We're just doing it while we're moving. And so it's very much like a moving meditation where you're checking in with what's in my body, what emotion is currently present in my muscles, in my cells. And initially when I tapped in, it was a lot of fucking anger, because it was a lot of anger from all the things that I never was allowed to be angry about. And so finally there was space for my body to go like, no, I want to throw a tantrum because I don't want to be responsible for everything. I don't want to be in control. I don't want, And so it comes out in the way that I move, the type of music I was moving to, which was very angry music, the outfits that I wore that were very like they felt like protection, versus now I don't wear shoes anymore. And I'm like, dancing in like fluffy, light pink stuff. It's just, it nearly makes my own angry part want to vomit because it's so happy. So yeah. Does that like help clarify what it's like?
It does. Yeah. Well, one other thing, I want to go one step further into it, is you said that there was anger that was pent up in your muscles and your cells. For someone like me who's like, what do you mean anger in your muscles or cells? Maybe you can just speak to what that means, and if that is something that you think women who are watching are also experiencing, whether they know it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, there is a lot of S factor, and the work that I do, and I think a lot more women are doing, is based on this idea of like somatic movement. And there's different branches of, somatic healing and movement that's out there, but it essentially, all of it says the same thing, which is that our stories can be found in our bodies, in our physiology, and that our experience over our lifetime is actually shown in our body. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So if you see someone who is like super hunched over, right? When I see a woman's body, I have an instinctual reaction when I scan her body as to what she went through in her life. I don't know the exact details. I'm not being psychic here or anything. It's purely like, oh, okay, heart is caved inward, chest is caved inward. There's a protective stance that your body has taken for a lot of, there's that one TED talk, I don't remember who it is. I don't know if you do, but that's all about body language and about how if you stand like this, you start to feel more confident. It's like they call it like the Superman stance or something, because it really is true that if you, inhabit your body and experience your body in a certain way, this is going to feel very different than this. And so when over time you've had a lot of heartbreak or a lot of sadness, that's going to start to happen. If you've had you see women, I see this all the time, women who have had sexual trauma, their hips get really tight. It even, if we want to go even further, it can sometimes go from generation to generation. So it could be if all the women in the family have had some sort of sexual trauma and they're tight in their hips, then, it gets passed on to the kid. So that's what we mean when we say there's anger in our muscles and in our cells, or joy.
I love the work that you do.
Thanks. I do too.
How are we doing on time?
We are good.
Okay, great. So tell me, our relationship, what role has this played in your journey of embodiment, of reclaiming your erotic feminine, and any other part that you'd be inspired to speak toward?
Yeah. I'm so glad we're going there. Okay. So all my past relationships were me and my primarily in my masculine energy, meaning I just want to break down for anyone who may have not been watching any of the other interviews for whatever reason, you totally should. very quick breakdown: masculine, feminine. Masculine, very targeted, linear. It's very much the values that our world is currently focused on: productivity, getting shit done, that sort of a thing. And the feminine is a lot more holistic, a lot about surrender, a lot about being, soft and ebb and flowing and emotional. And it's sort of like a river, the riverbed and the water. The water is the feminine and the riverbed is sort of the masculine. So the masculine very much leads and holds, whereas the feminine is like all around inside, like water. So that's just to give you a general idea. If you've been hearing these terminologies like being thrown around and you're not really sure what it means. Now in my case, because I was the oldest kid, so I was always the responsible one, the one managing everything. Then I became a film producer. So again, team of 60 people, and I'm the one managing all these crazy people. I was always so used to being in that place of I am controlling everything. And so I took that same energy into my relationships, and in all of them, I didn't realize that what I desired was to actually relax and to surrender and to be emotional and connected and all of that. But I was so scared to do that because I was like, who is going to keep it all together? Because that had always been my role when I was either in a family dynamic or in a group dynamic. I was the one in charge, and I didn't want to. And so with us, I think, what happened was very early on, it was a bit of a divine timing thing, in that I had just decided on my own before I even met you to let go of the career that involved me controlling everything. So I had already, I think, energetically taken a stand for my feminine. And then you showed up. I was like dating here and there, and it was always the same thing. It was like these partners who would show up, and I would still have to lead. I would still have to come up with where we're going to go and what we're going to do and and like little things like that somehow just keep you in that energy. And then you came along, and I just remember, you just took the reins, and it was like, okay, we're going to meet here at this time. I'm like, oh, okay, this is great. I don't have to do any planning. And then that just kept going, right? And it wasn't just you taking the lead on things. It was also, what's equally important in the masculine is reverence for the feminine. And so it was my birthday, and I got flowers, and I got this beautiful fruit basket, and I got, right? So all these things were like, oh, I was feeling very revered and taken care of early on when we were first, like when you were courting me. Before
you were courting me, but
yeah, that's true. I was courting you for
seducing me.
I was courting you for a job. That's a different story. And so energetically, I felt like, oh shit, I can actually be the softer side of me. I can tap into that. And then as we became closer and closer, I think you continuing to encourage me to be emotional, and to feel my feelings. And you kept being like, I don't particularly love the version of you that's in control, which was messaging that I had gotten, from my dad and from the world around me. Like, you are more valued and more loved when you have your shit together, and when you're not, quote unquote, being dramatic, emotional, or hysterical. And you kept loving me more and more the more I cried, to the point that I was like, do you have like a weird fetish thing with me crying? Right? Which you don't. Why are you smirking?
As far as we know.
And it felt so good to be seen and to be validated and valued in that version of myself. And so it started with the courting, moved into the emotional piece, and then eventually landed in the sexuality piece, where it became, I felt okay to go wherever I needed to go. I felt okay to be like laughing one second and crying the next, to feel all my range as a woman, to be, why are you laughing again? Why are you laughing? I need to know. Okay. Is
Go
it?
ahead.
Okay. Okay. Um,
So laughing one moment, crying the next, feeling
yeah.
like your total range was accepted.
Yeah, like angry the next, like just having all that and you just being like this consistent, like I'm here, I'm holding all of these emotions and I've got this. And it's not a reflection on myself. I don't feel like not confident about, about any of that. Like there was just so much of that that it really helped my body go and just sigh into it, which I think in the past was not what I was doing at all.
Mm, yeah. And from my perspective, and I didn't realize maybe what was happening ahead of time. I think we both kind of came into this just by some force of pull from the universe or our hearts. And the next thing you know, we're on this journey together. And my experience is that when you were in your head or trying to keep your shit together or trying to not be dramatic, I almost felt like I wanted to get away from you. Like it wasn't a conscious decision. It was just like, it was almost like nails on a chalkboard. Or a baby crying. It's like, this needs to like stop
Mm-hmm.
in some way, is that feeling. But the moment that I would notice you get emotional, I would have the exact opposite experience, which was just like I was being magnetized, drawn, sucked right in your direction. Like I could be doing anything. And like, if I just heard you or felt you being emotional, it was like, whoa, wait a second. Something needs my attention over here.
Yeah.
And so there was that pull. And then also physiologically as well, I responded when it's inappropriate perhaps or weird. I'm judging it right now a little bit, but like when you would cry or soften or open, I would actually feel myself become attracted to you, even if it on the surface level didn't seem appropriate because you're sad about something. How could I have turn on for you? But I just did. Like you just opened up, and because you opened, I showed up. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's important in talking about polarity. That there is what has been so I think challenging for a lot of we're neither one of us is a relationship coach, so we only know the basics from our own experience and from doing dabbling and reading a little bit here and there. But essentially,
don't sell yourself short. Hold on a second. You are badass, and you coach plenty of women on their relationships. You just don't label yourself that way.
true. Yes, we do go into a lot of relationship stuff, but more in relationship to our bodies and then outward. But yes, that's true. But polarity, I think is a huge problem that a lot of couples are having, and I really think that it's more and more. It's becoming more and more of um, a pattern that we're seeing in a lot of Western romantic couples because of the way that everyone has to be working and everyone has to be managing things, and so it's a lot harder for women, I think, to surrender when there is a job they're also going to and coming home from, when there is, oh, can we share? I feel like this is super relevant. Remember the other, like a few weeks ago when we had this like really big moment where we realized you were like, oh, all I want to do when I go, you're like, okay, I'm going to start it and you can chime in. So Jacob comes to me after one day, we're both sitting at the end of the workday and we're exhausted. I was like in the process of launching and and we're sitting down, we're both like, oh, so tired, and he shares with me that he's like, when I go into the office, I feel like I'm going to battle, like all day long. I'm just like, I'm like doing the thing, slaying the dragons, doing whatever I need to do. And then at the end of the day, like I really crave, this is him speaking, right? I really crave just like, love and affection and nurturing and like being taken care of. And I was like, oh yeah, I can see that. Like that makes sense. And then you had this moment where you were like, oh, wait a second. You also go to slay the dragons during the day. Like, no wonder it's really difficult for you at the end of the day to show up and be like, when we think of like the soldiers that go and like the women who are just at home, like they got like 20 hours of sleep, they're like good. They haven't been doing anything. And the men come home from battle. They have like all this food cooked for them and they're like ready to like give them, lots of.
You can say it, babe. It's all right. Go for it.
What?
You look like you're about to say something and then you reined it in.
Oh, really? I don't.
Okay.
He notices things I don't even notice, but they're always true. I just don't know what they are because I probably just skipped a step. So I don't remember, sorry. But now I lost my train of thought. What were we saying?
Well, that the women that were spending their days preparing to nurture the men, cook the food, take care
Yeah.
of things.
And so I imagine for a lot of women listening, this is part of what makes it so difficult for us now is like, if you are a household where both people are, doing a similar type job where they're, clocking in sort of and clocking out. And in addition, you have a lot of women who are sort of trying to manage some kids or running the household, like that also requires a lot of masculine energy. Being a mom, there's a huge piece of that role that is very masculine. You got to be like, okay, I'm managing this soccer practice. This is happening. And so again, that's why I believe that polarity goes away in something like marriage or when you get kids, is that there is the mom's like, I don't freaking have to, I'm the one who needs to be, I go to battle every day. Like I need to be nurtured and taken care of as well. And so it's really cool when you start to realize that dynamic is happening, because even though we can't instantly change the fact that we both need to be working in order to survive right now in 2016, especially in New York, we can be very aware of that dynamic and start to see what are the little things we can do to shift that. And I think that's part of what we're sitting in the inquiry in is like, okay, well, what do we need to do so that you get your needs met and I get my needs met as well?
Yeah, totally. So tell us the festival. Like I know we're coming up against the time restraint that we created here. One question that I was thinking of asking was to have you share some of your favorite tools, but I think that there's so much good, juicy content in the festival that there's going to be tools left and right. So if you're feeling really inspired to share something, you can, but I really want to know, why the festival, and maybe just paint a little bit of a picture of what people are about to step into.
Yeah. Yeah. The festival. So the festival, so exciting. I came up with this idea after watching Beyonce's Lemonade. I watched this amazing piece of art. It's like an hour long or however long it is. And I just remember walking away and being like, oh, I miss being inspired like this. And I miss feeling empowered like this. And so instantly I was like, I want to create a virtual experience that is a gathering of women all around the world. It doesn't matter where you are. You can pretty much log in as long as you have internet, where we can come together and celebrate our bodies while we're also honoring that we're still on the journey and we're still exploring and we're still finding things to help us heal and connect to our bodies. And so I really thought it would be cool to have an event that similar to an in-person festival. You walk into an in-person festival and you're like, oh, I could go see this panel on this subject, or I can go do a dance workshop here, or I can go and jam out with the DJ over there. I can go to the art gallery over here. And that's essentially what I decided to create with the Embody Festival, which is that every day you get that bundle in the morning, and it's like you're opening that email, and it's similar to showing up that day at the festival and going like, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do all of them if I have all day. And that was the idea. So I brought together all these different, my favorite feminine movement classes. All of them I've done, all of them I love, some of them I even teach. And you get those, those are in your inbox. And There is, playlists that are there to like, I'm so connected to music, and I think it's such a beautiful way for women to reconnect to the experience of being and feeling in their bodies. And I love making playlists. So I figured playlists had to be another part of it. And then of course, there's all these amazing women who have been my teachers and mentors in some shape or form, who I wanted to bring together and have them share their own stories, similar to what I shared, as to what it was that was, what happened to them in their early on in their life, whether it was messaging or incidences that had them feel like, oh, it's not safe, it's dangerous. Because this is what was coming up everywhere in my work, with my clients, in my own practice, in the embodied dance classes I teach at S Factor that I teach. Same thing. It was, the thing that is really stopping women from feeling deeply connected to their whole self, to their full range, was the fact that the erotic was still dangerous. And so this experience is really to sink you into your senses in the moment, as opposed to just like blast you with information. Have you feeling really good and feeling held by the sisterhood of women that are coming together to gather all around the world. And this was another piece. I just want to say this. This was another piece that was really, really important for me, was to make sure that there was voices as much as I physically can. I tried to bring in voices from all around the world through different experiences. So we have women in Europe, we have women in the States, we have women if in Bahrain, we have women
where?
From Bahrain. It's in the Gulf.
Great.
Yeah.
Did not know that.
You should watch them. So the idea is that I wanted to make sure there was voices of all different ethnicities from different countries, who could talk about their experience, so that we can see what is the universal theme here, and then also what is the difference between an experience of a woman maybe in North Africa versus in San Diego, California, Encinitas, let's be really specific, Encinitas, California, right? Like two very extreme different environments that you can grow up in, and yet somehow there's something that's very universal and similar in the experience of both women growing up in each location. So and then also I wanted to bridge the gap between not just personal development people, but also bring in women who've worked as dominatrixes, women who are art curators and event managers, women who are actresses and moms, and all across the board, different like occupations. Oh, we have a gender studies professor, right? So we've got academia, underground, sort of like sex world, and then all the life coaching and personal development stuff as well. So, yeah.
Love it. Well, I'm going to pass the mic back to you to take us out of here. And maybe one final question or inquiry is, do you have any advice for the women who are watching right now for them to get the most out of this experience?
Be present. I'm going to just leave it there.
Awesome.
Be present. Yeah, be present in all of it. Whether you're, hopefully watching all the different, or consuming in some shape or form the different content of the festivals, or just being present in your life and in your experience in your body. So, and the easiest way to do that is to just connect to your senses. So whenever you feel like you're disconnecting, to just, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and then just tune into one sense at a time. You can start with your hearing, then you can go to your sense of taste, sense of smell, and so on and so forth. You guys get the idea. So that's what I would say.
Okay.
Cool.
Well, let me hand it back to you to take us out of here.
Thank you. I just want to say thanks for, one, I just missed you a lot. So it's really, I know we were not talking about our personal lives, but it still feels good to spend time with you after I don't know how many days it's been that you've been away. And thank you for giving me a chance to, I felt it was important to have you be here in this conversation, because I still, I'm human like everyone else, and I don't, still really, really challenging for me to talk about some of these things. And so again, having that like really like that masculine presence, which I feel all the way from St. Petersburg to New York, I think helps me feel like it's cool. Like I'm good. I can talk about this. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Awesome.